Now, the Border Management Authority has announced that over 27,000 people were deported while attempting to enter South Africa illegally, with most of them using the Lebombo and Beitbridge border posts. This is over the festive season. The authority says it's concerned about public transporters who continue to consciously transport illegal migrants across ports of entry. Border Management Authority Commissioner Dr Mike Masiapato says tightening border management at Lebombo and Beitbridge is changing the trend of illegal land migration. In fact, he joins us this morning to tell us more. Dr Masiapato, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. Before we get to issues around illegal entries into the country, I want to just talk about, I suppose, the positive angles to the story. We saw the legitimate movement of over 5 million people over 43 days over the festive season. We saw more than 13,000 aircraft pass through South Africa's international airports. By all accounts, we did quite well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the invite. Yeah, indeed. This has been one of those periods which we expected that we will be kind of moving towards the pre-COVID average numbers. In terms of the period, the festive period, as it were, we have been averaging COVID around 6 million. But indeed, this time around, we had initially thought that we will, hit the 6 million mark. But we are still a bit a million below. So we are listed around 5 million. And we do hope that in the coming festive period, especially the 24-25, December, January period, we should be completely recovered from the pre-COVID numbers.
So let's talk about those 27,000 people who attempted to enter South Africa illegally. Is it a sign, Dr. Masiapato, that that number could be much higher and that these were just the individuals we were able to identify?
Yeah, you see, the reality is that the issue of illegal migration has been very much problematic in the country. And I suppose we can fairly agree that over the years, we haven't necessarily invested much in as far as the space is concerned. And that is why with the establishment of the Border Management Authority, we are looking at a lot of investment into the space, particularly in terms of, investment in technology, so that we can start to have some, broader feel, especially in terms of our land ports, coverage-wise, and be able to fairly, deal with this particular scourge more decisively. But maybe just to indicate, if you were to look at the numbers of the intercepted, around 15,000 or so, those are the ones that were intercepted on the basis of just entering the country without documentation at all. Some of those were intercepted on the vulnerable segments of the borderline. Some of those were trying their luck in the port of entry, as it were. But you will realize there that we have around 6,000 plus individuals that we intercepted that we call undesirable. So there you will see that is a very serious increase. We haven't actually reached that number per se. But the rollout of the biometric movement control system across our ports is starting to help us in as far as the interception of undesirability is concerned, because here we talk about people coming from other jurisdictions who might be wanted by those particular countries. Either they committed crimes or they were involved in terror activities or they actually overstayed in South Africa before. So we ultimately, in a way, don't allow them to come into the country. As you will know, undesirability means that you get banned to re-enter South Africa for the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. But of course, inadmissibility is the basic one. These are the ones who are just carrying passports that are not, for example, machine readable. These are the ones without invalid visas or not even having just basic yellow fever certificates while coming from, yellow fever endemic countries. So there we talk about around 4,000. All in all is 27,000. But of course, we do know that the number of those that were not intercepted is also existing, but we are working to make sure that we are able to cover also in those areas.
Yeah, and the majority of the people who were intercepted, this 27,000 odd people, were at Lebombo and Beitbridge border posts. And this is not new, right? We've known for some time now that our borders are incredibly porous. How do we begin to address that?
Yeah, you see, Indeed, you're right. I mean, out of the 15,000, those without documents, mainly the majority were intercepted around Lebombo, which is around 6,000 plus. And of course, in terms of Beitbridge, it's around 1,800 in the 43 days of the festive period, as it were. But of course, coming to your question, what is it that we are doing to make sure that we deal with this whole issue, as it were? As I said the other day, mostly we are looking at the investment in terms of procuring drone technology, so that it can then give us the ability to do overall surveillance, especially in the vulnerable segments of the borderline, so that we are able to have our team doing very much informed reaction, as it were. At the point where we are able to, see people attempting to come through, we are then able to do the response and be able to do this work. So currently, on the basis of the processes that we are involved in now in terms of procuring drone technology, we are fairly deploying physical individuals, border guards, as well as members of the SNDF in those particular areas. But we do know that it is, remember we talk here about a borderline very much with thick bushes in other parts and all of those, and therefore technology becomes very much critical. Right. In terms of the issues in the port, there we have really made a lot of work. One of the critical issues we have done is to make sure that nobody is allowed to enter the port unless they are carrying requisite documents, meaning that those people that don't have documents are not allowed to enter into the port in terms of our access control model. Already what that it does is it actually exonerates our immigration officials from possibly being corrupted or they themselves wanting money from people without documents, because they wouldn't even reach them. Hence we stop them at the access gate, as it were.
Yeah, in fact, that was my next question to you. The fines that have been handed out to bus companies, for example, comes to over 3.5 million people, bus companies that were found to have been transporting people without the requisite documentation. But, could the number be higher, Dr. Masiapato, just in terms of the number of people attempting to enter without the requisite documentation, and those who are making it through, even though they don't have that documentation, as a result of bribery?
Yeah, you see, that is why I indicated that one of the interventions we have done to address especially the aspect of bribing, especially in the port of entry. As I'm saying, we have actually are now doing things differently, meaning that we now have consolidated our access points. We no longer allow people to enter into the port of entry, as it were. Initially or before, people would basically enter into the port environment. And in the port, you will find there are some facilitators. They link up with officials. They do some bit of corruption. There are some briberies, and people end up coming through in terms of the actual port. Like now, as I'm saying, we have then brought in the border guards to do full access control with some members of the SAPS to make sure that people don't enter into the port, as it were. But in terms of the future plans to completely eradicate this aspect, as part of the technology I spoke about, we are looking at a process of procuring body cams, so that everything that happens in the port, any kind of interaction that our officials have with any of the travelers should be on camera that is controlled off-site. And that particular camera, the person, him or herself, cannot be able to switch it off. They can only switch it off under the supervisor's authority when they go to the bathroom at a controlled area, as it were. All those are the things that we are planning, but there are technology-based interventions that we are going to be bringing in, and we should be able to deal with the majority of the issues. In terms of the conveyancers, the buses in particular, we met with them. We instructed them that they must stop ferrying people without documentation. That is why they had actually committed that when people buy cross-border tickets, they will require passport. When people enter their buses, they will require passports. And in instances where we find a particular bus company continuing not to work with us, continuing to ferry these people, we have spoken to the cross-border road transport agency that gives them the cross-border permits, and they have committed that in those instances they will withdraw those. But the next thing that we are also looking at is to start charging these particular drivers for aiding and abetting, which is a criminal offense as well.
Right. Body cams, drones, it's a lot of technology. It's much needed, as you say. But do we have the money?
Yeah. Maybe let me indicate that if we are to look at the money that is required to be able to procure those technologies, vis-a-vis, for instance, the nature of the challenges that the country is dealing with as we speak, in as far as illegal migration is concerned, as a country, we should be able to compare those. Secondly, if you look at the impact of illicit economy into the country and the strangling of our economic growth, is also very much evident. So we just need to compare the impact of those two aspects to the kind of money that is required. However, we are doing our part in terms of engaging with the leadership, and therefore we are hoping that we should be able to get those resources, as it were.
So essentially, we don't know whether we have the money as yet.
No, or maybe let me put it this way, so that it's a bit clearer, to say that we do have the money to do certain aspects. For instance, we are currently rolling out the biometric movement control system, which is a system that is starting to help us to deal with corruption, where people will bring passports into the port without the owners themselves and get those passports stamped, for example, by some of the individuals in the system. But now, that is no longer going to be possible. With the introduction of biometric movement control system, every passport must be accompanied by an individual, because the movement control gets recorded through your fingerprinting and all of those. So already we have started. And again, in terms of the procurement of the drones, we have started with the money that we got from the criminal asset recovery account, which is fairly administered by the Department of Justice. So we do have some bit of money, but I'm just saying, for the broader future, as it were, we are looking at full investment in the space, given the impact of the issues we are looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. If we weigh that up against the money that is required, it will be a good investment indeed. Dr. Mike Masiapato, let me thank you for your time this morning, the Commissioner of the Border Management Authority.